Today's topic is something we all as veterans have likely been impacted by in some way. I want to talk about a very important new report that was just released by the VA, the Annual Veteran Suicide Prevention Report. But before we begin, we are obviously going to be discussing suicide in this video. We're going to use the actual word because this is a serious topic, but this conversation is going to be calm and focused on education and prevention. There will be no graphic details, but this is the warning ahead of time. My goal is to help you understand what the data actually says, what it doesn't say, and what I believe veterans should take away from it. I'm Dr. Sharma, physician, board-certified psychiatrist, and Air Force veteran. As always, I have resources in the video description. If you're having a tough time, reach out, get the help that you need. It's extremely important. And remember, this video is not medical or psychiatric advice. It is only for educational purposes, and there is nothing wrong with asking for help and getting treatment. And what I want to do today is walk through this point by point, translate the data into plain language, and give you my clinical perspective on what matters here. Because whether you personally struggle with mental illness or not, this report still affects you. It affects how veterans are talked about in the media, how policy decisions get made, how resources are allocated, and honestly, how society understands what we go through after service. So let's start with the basics. Every year, the VA publishes a national report looking at veteran deaths by suicide using national mortality data. This year's report includes trends through 2023. And right away, I want to say something important. This is not just a headline number. So this isn't something like good news or bad news. This report is essentially a map. It tells us where risk exists, who is being reached, and maybe more importantly, who is being missed. So here's the headline number. In 2023, there were 6,398 veteran deaths by suicide. That is slightly lower than the 6,442 reported the previous year. Some people hear that and say, see, things are getting better. And other people hear that and say nothing has changed. But the reality is a little bit more complicated. Because at the same time that the total number decreased a little bit, which is great, the suicide rate per 100,000 veterans actually increased. And I need everybody to understand this difference. Total numbers and rates are not the same thing. If the population changes, if the number of veterans overall changes, the rate can actually go up even if the raw number goes down. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. So when you see headlines that seem contradictory, as I've seen, they're both technically true, but without the context, they don't really tell you the full story. Now, here's what I personally believe is one of the most important findings in this entire report. About 61% of veterans who died by suicide were not receiving VA healthcare in the last year of their life. So let's pause for a second, because really this changes the conversation completely. This means the issue is not only about improving care inside the VA. Yes, that should be done and systems should always improve. But if the majority of at-risk veterans are not actively engaged with care, then prevention can't really rely on only the healthcare system. It becomes more of a community issue. It becomes about connection, how open that pathway is to get care, how comfortable veterans feel in that environment, if they can see themselves going and getting mental health care. It becomes about whether someone notices when a veteran starts withdrawing, whether someone sends that message, whether the veteran themselves sends that message, whether someone reaches out when something feels off. At the same time, I do need to mention here that by its nature, suicide is something that is very difficult to predict. Scientists and doctors have tried their best for many years, but it's something that is unpredictable and can be impulsive in nature, meaning it happens in that split-second moment. We do have protective factors, right? Like things like a good support system, family, children, a supportive work environment. Those factors are protective against suicide. And then we have risk factors like significant depressive symptoms, lack of a support system, lack of a supportive work environment, being in chronic pain, among other things that are risk factors. And we use these protective factors and risk factors to come up with a suicide risk. But the reality is, even with that suicide risk determination, it is still something that is difficult to predict. Someone can be at a low risk using this equation but it still ends up happening. Or vice versa, somebody can be at a high risk for many years and they don't harm themselves. So again, it's very difficult to predict. And no matter what anybody says, it is not a weakness. It's not the easy way out. It's not anything like that. The best way I can explain this phenomenon is that in the setting of a very low and depressed mood, or being in severe pain, or having severe anxiety, the brain presents this as a solution, but it's obviously an irrational solution. The brain can trick the person into thinking that this is something that they should do, that it is a choice. But it comes from an illness, a mental illness. Because when you remove that depression, when you remove that anxiety, that PTSD, whatever that problem is from the mental health perspective, those thoughts of suicide would not exist. Because at baseline, for us as humans, that's not a natural thought. At baseline, we want to live, we want to survive, we want to procreate, we want to have purpose and meaning in life. Now, another point that jumped out to me clinically is the role of pain. In the VA's detailed reviews, one of the most frequently identified risk factors was pain. Over 50% had documented pain issues. And this is huge because when people think about suicide risk, they often only think about depression. But chronic pain does something different. It erodes sleep. It reduces mobility. It isolates people socially. It slowly chips away at identity, especially for veterans who were once highly functional physically. A lot of you guys know I have covered chronic pain on the channel before, and I'll link that video at the end. But if you're watching this and thinking, I'm not depressed, I'm just exhausted and hurting all the time, that still matters. That still increases risk. Now, another major data point, and I want to approach this carefully and respectfully, is the role of firearms, right? And about 73% of veteran suicide deaths involved firearms. And I want to be very clear here, this is not a political statement, okay? This is a safety discussion. Because suicidal crises are often brief, right? They happen in minutes or hours. It's impulsive, it's in the moment. And when a highly lethal method is immediately available during that window, survival decreases dramatically. So when clinicians talk about lethal means safety, we are not talking about rights. We're talking about time. Creating just enough space between a moment of intense distress and a permanent outcome. That could mean temporary storage changes, locks, some kind of mechanism that could involve a trusted person. It's not forever, but just during difficult periods. Now, the report also highlights certain groups with higher risk, including younger veterans between 18 and 34. And I see this clinically all the time. You can be young and still have to carry heavy things emotionally. You can be young and still have chronic pain because of injuries in service. The transition out of service can be difficult for young people. There's a loss of structure. There's chronic injuries, right, that happen earlier than expected, strains in relationships, identity shifts that nobody prepared you for. It doesn't mean that you're weak, it means that you're human. Now, another important theme in this report is something I talk about often, the idea of layered risk, right? It's rarely just one thing. I've talked about this in benefits conversations as well. It's pain plus sleep problems, plus isolation, plus stress, plus access, plus hopelessness. And when enough layers stack together, the risk increases. So what do we actually do with all of this information? Because I never want to present data without giving practical direction. I don't want to just scare all of us. Here are 3 things I want veterans to think about. And it's not limited to these things. There's more, but we can start here. First, audit your sleep and your pain honestly. If you have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep or both, if you're hurting constantly and that also interferes with your sleep, that's not just getting older. It's not something that just happens normally to everybody. That is something that needs attention. Talk to somebody about it. This can be your primary care doctor, a therapist. It doesn't always have to be a medication, although it can be. The VA has a program for insomnia also, the CBTI program, which is highly effective. That program is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Whatever the solution may be in your case, the first step is asking for help. 2, reduce isolation by 1 small step. Not 10 steps, just 1. one message, one text, one email, one phone call, one appointment scheduled. Do whatever you're able to do to chip away at that isolation. Again, I know this is a process. A lot of veterans struggle with difficulties in social situations, difficulties in public or in crowds. I'm not asking you to jump into a concert in a mosh pit, okay? Just a small step to get out there, connect with someone else, whether that is a fellow veteran or a friend or a family member, whoever it is that you can connect with. And even if it's not in person, that's okay. If it's a phone call, FaceTime, text, like I was saying, anything that you can do to reduce the isolation. Third, plan for your difficult weeks. If you know certain situations make you spiral, like exhaustion, alcohol, stress, pain, plan ahead for that version of yourself. This is easier said than done, I know. But planning for that would be increasing your resilience now before you end up in one of those spiraling situations. This can be getting into therapy, talking with someone, getting on medication if you need it, starting exercise at whatever level you're at, which can be as simple as walking. I've talked about walking on the channel before and how we have a second heart in our legs and how we can activate that to improve our physical and mental health. You want to slowly stack the bricks of this plan to protect yourself when you're at those really low points. That is strength. It's not weakness. And I want to close with this. If you're a veteran who has had suicidal thoughts, you are not broken. You are not a failure. You are not alone. You are a human being carrying weight, sometimes quietly and sometimes for a very long time. It's like that analogy when you hold a glass of water for 30 seconds, it's not a big deal, but when you hold it for 30 minutes, it's a lot worse. Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts on this report. What stood out to you? What concerns you? What you think people are still missing? If you enjoyed this video, you might like the episode I did on chronic pain and how it can lead to depression in veterans. Click over here to check it out. And if you want more content like this on veterans' health, mental health, and benefits, click over here to subscribe if you haven't already done so. While you're at it, throw a like on this video. I want to thank you for joining me for this episode, taking time out of your day to spend it listening to me. As always, thanks for watching. Dr. Sharma signing off. See you next time.